Week on the podcast, I have Cole of the Iconoclast Instagram page and podcast as well. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast this week. I really want this to be an episode discussing, what it means to be a libertarian for people that may not be familiar with that political ideology, and kind of highlight bits and pieces of the libertarian movement and where you kind of see it moving forward. So, getting into some of the questions here, I wanted to start with, what does it mean to be a libertarian? Like, if somebody hasn't heard of that political ideology before, how would you define that?
So to me, libertarian has kind of become a broad stroke term. You have people who are, it kind of transcends left and right. If you have people who are very far to the right who call themselves libertarians, you have people who are very far to the left who also call themselves libertarians. You have people more in the center, but the general agreed upon stance, I guess, as the name implies, is a belief in less government, at least less government in certain areas. There's obviously some disagreement there. You'll have some more right-wing libertarians who might be a little bit more pro-police. You might have some left-wing libertarians who believe in less economic freedom in that sense. So to me, it's more of a blanket term than one kind of uniform movement. But I'm a big proponent of unity of libertarians, because even if we disagree on certain philosophical questions, what should the rich do with their money, I think we can all agree on certain things. We're all anti-war. I think that's something almost anybody who calls himself a libertarian can agree on. We're all, in some sense in favor of sound money. That you'll see different you'll see different takes on that as you go left and right, but there is some kind of economic literacy that comes with being libertarian. And I also like to, when someone's asking me about libertarian and I'm talking about libertarianism and I'm talking about it for the first time, I like to separate the Libertarian Party from the libertarian ideology.
Okay.
Because
why is that?
Not as much anymore, but for a long time, the Libertarian Party was kind of borderline satirical almost. I'm not sure if you saw there were some famous clips from the 2016 Libertarian debate where it was almost like you just got some actors and paid them to act like what they thought a libertarian might sound like.
Okay.
And make it as funny as possible. Like, there was one clip where a guy said, "A license to drive? What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in my own damn toaster?" and a lot of things like that. It was very goofy. And so for a long time, if you said, "I'm a libertarian," the association would be with that crowd.
It's kind of a joke, right?
Yeah. So I started distinguishing myself as a lowercase L libertarian. Politically, I'm an independent.
Okay.
I've never considered myself a part of a party, at least not since I was in high school.
Okay.
But the lowercase libertarian, where you believe in the principles of freedom, you want government to dial back.
Okay, so moving on here, what are we're diving right in here. So what are your thoughts on gun control?
So gun control is a very tough question. I'm very set in my views of it. Not a tough question in that way, but it's tough in how people discuss it. There's a whole lot of talking past each other.
Okay.
And often the argument I see is, someone in the pro-gun control crowd will be talking about how kids are dying, we need to get these guns out of the hands of civilians. And the only response I see from pro-gun people is, "Well, it's my right. The Second Amendment says I can have this."
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm very pro-gun, and I agree with that. However, I think what we need to look at in terms of gun control and should we, shouldn't we, is the effect it has on disarmed populations. I couldn't care less about the Second Amendment. My support for guns has nothing to do with that. I look at, you just look at this country alone. What happened to the Native Americans, the first gun control laws in this country were passed to keep Native Americans from owning guns. And not long after that, laws were passed to keep enslaved people from owning guns to stop a potential slave revolt. So when you look at gun control through that lens, Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, it has historically been used to subjugate and make more vulnerable minority populations.
Okay.
And that, to me, is the biggest reason to oppose gun control.
So let me ask you, do you believe that there should be any limitations in owning a firearm?
I believe, and I think any sane person would say, that someone who's mentally unstable, someone who's crazy, should not, in theory, have access to a gun. The question is how we implement that.
Yes.
Do we trust the government to decide who is and isn't mentally fit to own a gun?
Yeah.
And once we go down that path, where does it stop? Who do they decide, oh, this person, posted something criticizing us on social media. They're mentally unstable. No guns for them. Yeah. And that's kind of the path I don't want to go down. And just on the topic of gun control, also, I want to add, people will often use statistics from, England, Australia, other European countries about how they implemented gun control and they have no school shootings. And yes, it's true that they don't have school shootings, but they're missing part of the picture, which is that gun ownership, the number of guns in civilian hands in those countries, it maxes out at around 50 per 100 civilians. So roughly every 1 in 2 people owns a gun. And it's not exact, of course, because some people own multiple guns, but a general sense. In the US, that number is 120. There are more privately owned firearms than there are people.
Yep.
So even aside from the other effects of gun control, how would you control that many guns? How would you prevent criminals from getting firearms when there is such an active black market for it already in this country?
Yep. I definitely agree with that. I'm also pro-gun. I shoot regularly. I have my concealed carry permit. So I definitely agree with your stance there. Now, considering what happened in Nashville, last week, that tragedy, and people focusing on the fact that the shooter was trans, do you think that trans folks have a higher susceptibility to committing mass crimes like that? That is a popular narrative now, considering that the shooter came out as trans, right? That we found that out. So do you think that plays a part at all in those mass shootings when you're talking about like mental stability?
I really, I hate when the media focuses on the identity of the shooter in that way, because to me, it's all apex fallacy. And for people listening who are unfamiliar with the term, apex fallacy is when you generalize a large group by the actions of a small portion. So you couldn't judge any group by what 100 people did. You surveyed, you go into the South and survey 100 people about, say, I don't know, abortion. And if 60 of them say they're pro-life, do you make that generalization about Southerners as a whole? You can't get any information from a group of 100 people. So, right. So I just don't like when that's focused on at all, because it really doesn't tell you anything. And if you're going to focus on the fact that shooter was a trans woman, there have been, I think, hundreds of mass shootings in the last 15 years. Obviously, I think 3 of them in total were committed by trans people. I read somewhere the other day it was 3 people. So, if anything, if you're going by that logic, it would be cis people who are more likely to commit shootings. And of course, that's ridiculous logic, but just going by that logic, it would be more rational to say
own
that.
Guns, right? Yeah. So that was a popular narrative that I saw coming out of the right after the shooting, because they said, oh, this person is mentally unstable and fit to own a firearm. And, that makes you scratch your head, because this is supposed to be the party of, owning like pro-gun, like pro-2A. And I find that concerning because, again, it's generalizing. Both sides tend to do that. They pick one person and say, like, the left likes to use all white men are horrible people, and then the right likes to pick people in the LGBTQ plus community that do one bad thing, and then suddenly it paints a picture for the entire community, which that it's not representative of that. So I definitely agree with that. But yeah.
And of course, in most cases, when the shooter is a man, the talk is all about toxic masculinity from the left.
Yes,
so
of course it is.
There's always generalization, whatever the identity of the shooter is.
Yep. Okay, so what do you say to people that say that voting Libertarian is throwing away a vote?
So that's a very interesting question. I dealt with that a lot in 2020 because it was one of the most fear-mongered elections in our country's history, and they're all fear-mongered. You're always getting the same propaganda of vote for one of these two people. Anything else, you're just throwing away your vote. Mm-hmm. My response to that is, look at what you're voting for. Look at the awful corrupt system that you're upholding by voting for one of the two major parties. How is that not throwing away your vote? I mean, if you're voting for the same corrupt system that's been in power for decades and has been screwing over everyday Americans, that's the best way to throw away your vote. The way to not throw away your vote is to vote for somebody who wants change, vote for somebody who wants something different. And the fact is, a vote for third party in the political process is, if anything, more effective, because unless you're in a swing state, your vote for one of the major party candidates means almost nothing. If you live in Tennessee and you vote Democrat, that vote's going down the toilet. If you live in California and you vote Republican, that vote also means nothing. However, no matter where you live, if you vote third party, you're helping to change future narratives. And what I mean by that is, not many people know this, but if a party receives 5% of the presidential popular vote, then they receive federal funding in the next election. So if a libertarian candidate were to receive 5% of the popular vote, you would see a much more level playing field the next time, because the Democrats and Republicans are getting funding that this third party is not receiving. And with that funding, they could spread their message to a lot more people.
Yeah, I did not know that. So that's also something that I'm learning today. Very interesting. So do you believe that libertarians would have a better chance with ranked choice voting?
I do. I think ranked choice voting is a very good idea, and it's becoming more and more popular. I think Maine already has it. Alaska is either has it or is voting on it. Mm-hmm. But that with that system in place, the entire argument about throwing your vote out the window is gone, because you can, if you say prefer Biden over Trump, if you think Biden is the lesser evil, you could still vote for a libertarian candidate and then make Biden your second choice and Trump down at the bottom. Or if you think Trump is better, Trump's the lesser evil, you could do the libertarian and then Trump. So people would have a lot more flexibility to vote their conscience if they're not feeling necessarily as bold or as confident in keeping votes away from the person they hate more. Yeah.
I still think that even with ranked choice voting, people are going to have a hard time with, people are just so fixated on their party and who they identify with, that it would still create this like divide. And I'm just a little concerned about that, because people would be like, well, wait, who's the conservative candidate? Who's the liberal candidate? And they'll really just base their votes off of that, when it's really supposed to be, you're considering multiple options, not just the two. So yeah, I'm still a little concerned about that part of it.
Do you mean in a setting where, for example, there is a viable third or fourth or even fifth party and people still kind of dichotomize themselves either as just liberal or conservative? Yeah, exactly. I can see that. My hope would be that if there are more than two parties, we as Americans don't see ourselves quite as split down the middle, mm-hmm. because we are really very different. You talk to 10 Democrats you'll get 10 different political ideologies. You talk to 10 Republicans, you'll get 10 different political ideologies. So a down the middle split is not representative of what people believe. So maybe I'm just more optimistic, but I would sincerely hope if there's 4 or 5 parties, like I think England has 5. If there's 4 or 5 parties, there's less of a divide because people don't see people in a different party as the other side, just an other side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think that we would eventually get there, but especially with the way that politicians are speaking today, like they don't talk in the sense that, okay, this is what we in our party need to do to build up America, whatever. They're the bad guys. We need to make sure that they don't get into power. It's just voting against rather than voting for. So I feel like that's really what's fueling a lot of division in America, in the political realm at least. So I'm not sure how long it will take us to get out of that state is what I'm saying more so.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you see that too with a lot of people in the Democratic establishment will condemn ranked choice voting. I've even seen people condemning the idea of open primaries in 2024 because they think that'll somehow help Trump get reelected. You know, if Trump's not in jail, they think that'll help him. They think an open primary where you challenge Biden for the Democratic nomination would somehow help Trump. So they're going to dig their heels in it anyway for anti-establishment voices to be heard. Mm-hmm. And people fall for it, which is a shame.
So that actually made me think of a couple questions. So first, what are your thoughts on Trump getting arrested?
Well, if Trump was being arrested for war crimes, which he is absolutely guilty of, and okay. I actually have a podcast episode coming about exactly that, going in depth on his war crimes. Because, side note, every time I make a post calling Trump a war criminal, I have just a pouring in of comments saying, "What war crimes? Trump didn't commit war crimes, you stupid liberal." So instead of addressing each and every one of these people, I'm just going to make a podcast episode about it. And I meant to do it months ago, but I've been super busy. But I'll have that out soon. Anyway,
thanks.
That was a total side note. If Trump was being tried and potentially imprisoned for his war crimes, I would be all for it. And from what I've seen, it seems like, you know, paying hush money to a porn star using campaign funds, that's illegal, and someone should justly be tried and imprisoned for that. But the overarching problem to me is how politically motivated this seems, because we've had many politicians do far worse. I mean, just go back a few presidents and you have someone who lied under oath about an affair he had while in office, and somehow there were no charges pressed for that. So I guess what I would hope for is consistency. If we're going to go after Trump for, you know, money corruption, then we should go after every politician who has been involved in similar dealings. I mean, hell, there was John Edwards, not John Kerry, both Democratic candidates in the 2000s, but John Edwards was a Democratic candidate who had a secret affair, I think, throughout both of his presidential campaigns. And there was even someone who wrote a book about it. Like, this was widely known, and he admitted to it. And I think there was a similar hush money case, and yet he was never prosecuted. So to me, the idea of a politically motivated prosecution is scary. Someone shouldn't be imprisoned because of how they interact with the establishment. They should be imprisoned because of the crimes they commit. And I don't think that's what's happening with Trump.
Yeah, I think that people just hate Trump so much that they would, honestly, I joke about this, but it's true. They would jail him for jaywalking if they could. Mm-hmm. At this point, they just irritated he exists. So this doesn't shock me or surprise me at all. So
Spike Cohen, if you're familiar with him, he's a libertarian guy. He showed a statistic that apparently 76% of people in a recent poll believe that it was a politically motivated arrest, but of those 76%, 60% are okay with it. Like they don't even care that it's politically motivated. They just want Trump in jail. And part of that is just that Americans are tired of Trump. But I think a lot of that also illustrates how divided we are, that that someone on the other side is considered, it can just be jailed and you're okay with that. Like if Joe Biden was sent to jail on some, chalked up charge, I'm sure many Republicans would also be just fine with that.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Okay, so speaking of Joe Biden, this is a great segue. Do you think that he's going to run again?
Oh, I hope not. Our presidential elections just get older and older. I remember I think it was the 2016 election. I was 15 years old at the time, just first getting into politics. And Bernie Sanders was making his first run for president in the Democratic primaries. He was 74 at the time, and all the talk around him was, wow, this guy's really old to be president. I can't believe he's running. And then 4 years later, we had an election between, I think Trump was 74 at the time and Biden was 78. So in just 4 years, we went from a 74-year-old being ridiculously old to two guys that age or older in the general election. And now there's talk that it'll be them again 4 years after that. So we just need to start turning back the clock on the candidates we nominate.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think, and you may not like this, but I think AOC might be eligible to run because her birthday is right before Inauguration Day. And that's what I heard.
I certainly think that would be interesting to watch unfold on the Democratic scene. She kind of straddles the line between the establishment and the rogue types like Bernie Sanders. And of course, the Democrats did everything they could to rig primaries against Bernie Sanders in both 2016 and 2020. That's been well documented. So I'd be interested to see if they tried to do the same to AOC, or if they tried to push her more toward the establishment center wing of the Democrats. I don't know, but the debates would also be interesting.
Yeah, and then I did just think of a question. Do you think that anyone's going to challenge Biden if he chooses to run again on the Democratic side?
Oh, that's also a really good question, because I noticed in 2020 when that you had this giant Democratic field and all of them were viciously attacking each other. As soon as it became clear that Biden would be the nominee, everyone really just fell in line in support of him. And you had candidates like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who just weeks ago had been calling this man every evil name they could. And now he's a dedicated public servant with years of trustworthy service to our country. Yeah. So whether they go back to that more attacking method and maybe challenge him, I don't know. What I would guess is that the establishment stays behind Biden, but you might see a more rogue candidate, sort of like how Tulsi Gabbard was in 2020, challenging him. I think there is still somewhat of an anti-war presence in the Democratic Party, and perhaps you get someone who's really fed up with the situation in Ukraine, really fed up with our continued involvement in the Middle East, who steps in and says, there's still some of us in here who are anti-war. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll have to see how things unfold for sure. So moving on to the next question here. Would you ever vote for a Democrat or Republican in the future?
So I don't like to say never for anything. I did vote actually for in the 2022 midterms. I voted for a Republican for the Attorney General. Was it the Attorney General of Maryland? No, it was the, God, why can't I remember? Anyway, it was somebody who deals with comptroller. That's what it was. I don't know why it slipped my mind for a second, but I voted for a Republican for comptroller for the main reason that the governor's race was pretty much locked up in favor of the Democrat, and we knew he had huge spending plans, and that there would be a hit on taxes. So I thought perhaps a Republican comptroller might keep him in check somewhat. So I voted for the Republican for comptroller. He did not win, and there were a couple lower level races where I voted Democrat. But to me, the lower level is where you see less ideologues and polarized individuals, and it's more just people trying to work together to solve local issues.
Yeah.
So party matters less to me at that level. But in terms of a Senate or presidential election, I would have to be really convinced that this candidate is not necessarily on the side of liberty, but at least is going to advance us in some degree toward a more free society. Someone like Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky,
Okay.
He's a Republican, but certainly doesn't fall in line with the Republicans on many issues. He's good on war. He's good on the war on drugs. He's good on police, which is something a lot of Republicans are not good on. So that's someone I would vote for. I can't think of any Democrats at the moment. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. I voted for her in the 2020 primaries.
Okay.
When I was still registered as a Democrat, remnant of my high school days. But she left the party. So, yeah. I just leave it up to the candidate. If someone comes along that I'm really impressed with, I'll vote for them regardless of their party.
That's fair. I think that's how everybody should really do it. Honestly, really working along party lines or just voting along party lines is okay. Sometimes, like, I live in Colorado, but I vote primarily red because Colorado is as deep blue as it gets. I mean, we're on par with, California. So my vote it doesn't really matter anyway because the blue candidate wins. But I think that when it's a bit closer, a lot of things should come into consideration, like you said. So, yeah. My final question for you is, are you optimistic about the Libertarian Party going forward?
That's a good question because I see a lot of different paths they could take. So for those not familiar with the dealings within the party, last year there was kind of a takeover, and some call it a hostile takeover, some call it a revolution. It depends on how you view it, but there's a caucus within the Libertarian Party called the Mises Caucus. And there are things I agree with them on, there are things I disagree with them on. But their main talking point is regarding strategy. For too long, the Libertarians have had kind of a central focus on presidential elections, Senate elections. There's always one or two big elections that the Libertarians put all their chips into. In 2020, almost everything they did on social media, that they did in their ads, was all about Joe Jorgensen, who was their presidential candidate. But the fact is, you look at just about any politician, they didn't start off as a senator or as a representative or president, with the exception of Trump. They were a county council member, they were in state legislature, they were perhaps a mayor, and certain people in the Mises Caucus are trying to promote down ballot elections for Libertarian candidates, trying to get Libertarians elected into the more local offices where civilians have more of an influence. You can show up to your town hall meeting and tell your mayor or your county council why you think they shouldn't or should do something. So you elect some Libertarians to those levels and just let the party grow some roots. And from there, let some of these people progress to higher and higher offices. You're not just going to get someone elected to the Senate who's never served in office before.
That's a good point.
So if the Libertarian Party can, to answer your question, if the Libertarian Party can adopt that sort of strategy, I am optimistic. I think the belief in liberty can spread as more people who believe in it are elected to office. However, I don't think everyone in the Mises Caucus kind of falls into that. There's a lot of there's a lot of kind of trolling, if you will. Some of the state Libertarian Party pages, which are now controlled by the Mises Caucus, have done a lot of trolling since they've been since the takeover, and that's just adding to the satirical image that has plagued the Libertarian Party for years. So if they keep that up, I'm not optimistic. So it's all about whether they can strategize right. And honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I just learned what a libertarian was like a couple years ago. I wasn't even aware of that even existed. I'm also registered unaffiliated. So I'm curious to see how the Libertarian Party does in the next coming years, especially the next election and moving forward. They may have my vote depending on the candidate. So yeah, this talk has been very informative. And I know that you did a poll recently on your page about the worst president. I wanted to bring this up. And I wanted to know how that turned out. I think I know who won the worst president, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, so it surprised me in the moment, but looking back, it comes as no surprise. I set up basically a March Madness style bracket where I'd have individual matchups of presidents and just asked my followers which of these presidents was worse. And so then the winner, concept. You know, you want to call it a winner, you want to call it a loser, whatever, makes it to the next round and narrow it down, just like in March Madness. And except in March Madness, you want to win. But yeah, the winner ended up being Joe Biden. So
not surprising.
My thought obviously is recency bias.
Yeah, true.
People see, for example, Joe Biden versus Woodrow Wilson. A lot of people are going to look at that and say, "Who the hell is Woodrow Wilson?" You know, I could list 1,000 bad things Woodrow Wilson did that put the country in the crappy position it is today. But someone who maybe hasn't read as much history, isn't as active in following politics, might just see Woodrow Wilson as one of the older presidents, whereas Joe Biden is actively screwing things up now. And I saw that in other polls too. You know, Barack Obama and Donald Trump both won matchups that I wasn't sure they maybe should have. Andrew Jackson was out in the first round somehow. I have him in my top 5 worst presidents, but I certainly wouldn't put Biden in the top 5 worst all time. Top 15, sure, maybe top 10, but definitely not top 5.
Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, that's I thought that was cool and a cool concept, and of course I voted for Joe Biden because I just see what he's doing right now. So just like you said, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anything else that you wanted to add about the Libertarian Party, movement, ideology that you want listeners to know about?
I think the important thing to keep in mind in a time like this is to stay focused on what really matters, because the media, the Democrats, and the Republicans are all trying to divide us into this stupid culture war. And I see libertarians fall for it all the time. You know, like I said, there are libertarians who lean more right and there are libertarians who lean more left. So things like the Bud Light cans that, I don't know if you've heard about this. But,
oh yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah, Bud Light put out this rainbow can, and then they put another one with a trans activist on it. And people are losing their minds over it. It's like, it's a beer can. It's not even good beer. The problem is that you're drinking Bud Light. Like, if you drink good beer, you won't have to see this at all. Like, just don't focus on that. Focus on the Restrict Act, the TikTok ban that includes with it essentially a Internet Patriot Act. Focus on
tell me about that. Yeah, that's a big thing. Yep. Focus
on the billions we're sending to Ukraine. Focus on the real bad things the government is doing that we can all agree on. We don't care about the, gender of Mr. Potato Head or who is it? Cardi B? No, Lizzo playing a flute. Why do we care about those things? All it does is divide us.
Yeah. They're really convenient distractions though.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think Yeah, it does. And I also think that Trump's arrest was a distraction, but that's a whole nother discussion because it came conveniently at the same time the Nashville shooting happened. And there's a whole bunch of things we don't know their manifesto or anything like that. So I have a lot of conspiracy theories about various different things that are going on right now to just keep our eyes off of the ball and just see things slowly explode in the future. But, that's just life.
It's all about timing, right? Because, a great example of that, you had the Occupy Wall Street movement on the left against the corruption of big banks. You had the Tea Party. This was all back in 2011, 2012, 2013. They were starting to realize they had more in common than they had different. They were both against the establishment. They were against the big banks. And then suddenly banks are flying rainbow flags and everyone's talking about trans people using bathrooms. and then from there, you just see a complete divergence of left and right.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, this was super informative and I learned a lot. So thank you so much for coming on today. I'm sure my listeners will also learn a lot about being a libertarian. So I think you did a great job explaining what it means and what it doesn't mean. So
yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I always love having a good political conversation and